My name is Gerald Emmett. I am 81 years old, and until recently, I lived alone in the modest two-story house in Springfield, Illinois, that I bought with my wife, Margaret, in 1968. We raised our only child, Carol, in that home. Every floorboard, every chipped tile in the kitchen held a memory. That house saw everything. Margaret's laughter echoing on Sunday mornings when she made French toast, the sound of Carol's footsteps running down the stairs on Christmas morning, the silence that followed after the funeral when Margaret passed away from pancreatic cancer 5 years ago. I remember that silence most vividly. It pressed against the walls and filled every room, making even the smallest creak in the house sound like an intrusion. After Margaret died, I managed as best I could. I cooked for myself badly. I did the laundry, paid the bills, kept the yard neat. I wasn't helpless, only slow. I had a stroke of good luck with my health overall, a touch of arthritis in my hands, a stiff back in the mornings, and a hip replacement 3 years ago that took longer to heal than I expected. But my mind remained clear, and for that, I was always quietly thankful. I kept up with my reading, subscribed to the newspaper out of habit even though I read most news online, and still managed the checkbook on paper. Carol offered to put me on an app. I refused. Carol is 56. She lives with her husband, Michael, and their yellow Labrador, Buster, in a suburban neighborhood outside of Chicago. She's a dental hygienist, meticulous, efficient, and highly organized. Everything in her home is labeled, color-coded, and sealed. Michael works in IT, something to do with server infrastructure. I never fully understood it. He's the kind of man who always carries 2 phones, speaks in acronyms, and thinks in spreadsheets. We've never been close. Cordial, yes. Civil, but not close. He always called me Sir, which I took as politeness, but over time began to interpret as a boundary. A polite one, but a boundary nonetheless. After Margaret died, Carol started visiting more often, once a month, then every few weeks. At first, I was grateful. She cleaned the cabinets, rearranged the refrigerator, threw out expired spices I had no intention of using, but still found comfort in keeping. She bought me a new recliner, one that was easier on my back, though I never said mine hurt. Then she brought up the idea of me selling the house. It was too much for me, she said. Too many stairs, too many responsibilities, too isolated. I'd be safer closer to them. And I had fallen once in the winter on the back porch when I was trying to refill the bird feeder. That, I now realize, was the turning point. That's when she began to see me not as her father, but as a risk. At first, I resisted. I told her I was fine. I told her the neighbors checked in on me, which they did. I told her I liked my independence, which I did, but eventually, the practicalities piled up. I had to admit the winters were harsher. That shoveling snow was now beyond me. My doctor suggested I stop driving. And then there was the fall. Not a serious one, no broken bones, just a sprained wrist, and a long afternoon on the kitchen floor with my cell phone out of reach. That was the end of the discussion. Carol insisted I move in with her and Michael until we figure out something more permanent. She said it was temporary, that we'd hire a professional to help find the right assisted living place. That conversation never happened again. Instead, she suggested we sell the house while the market was still high. It's wasted space, she said. All that equity just sitting there while you're struggling with laundry. So I sold the house. We didn't use a real estate agent. Carol handled everything online. She had Michael create a spreadsheet with offers and closing timelines. I packed slowly, deliberately. I touched everything. Margaret's scarves, Carol's old trophies, the faded rocking chair from the nursery. I donated most of it. Some I kept. The bed, our bed, I couldn't part with. It was solid oak, hand-built, a wedding gift from Margaret's father. I had refinished it twice in 50 years. That bed had held everything, our sleep, our arguments, our grief. When we lost a pregnancy, our quiet reconciliations. I asked Carol if I could bring it. She frowned, said it would be a tight squeeze, but that we'd figure something out. I trusted her. The check from the sale went into an account in Carol's name. She said she'd manage the finances and make sure I never had to worry about anything. I didn't protest. I told myself it was easier that way. What would I spend it on anyway? I had everything I needed. A room, food, my books, and company, or so I believed. Their house was large and cold. Beautiful, yes. Quartz countertops, glass backsplash, recessed lighting in the ceilings, but cold in that modern, empty way. Carol had set up a guest room for me on the first floor. The walls were beige, the furniture minimal. There was a single chair by the window and a small television. "It's quiet here," she said. "You'll like it." I did, at first. The first few weeks went smoothly. Carol arranged for a part-time caregiver, a kind woman named Lena who came 3 times a week to help with bathing and meal prep. I didn't need the help, but I didn't resist. I saw it gave Carol peace of mind. Lena was pleasant, Polish, and spoke with a soft accent that reminded me of the nuns from my childhood school. Michael mostly stayed upstairs in his home office. We saw each other in passing. Sometimes he nodded, sometimes not. The house was silent most of the day, except for the sound of Buster's claws tapping across the hardwood floor. Buster was enormous, 12 years old, but still full of energy. He followed Carol like a shadow. She spoke to him like a child. "Did you miss Mommy? Do you want your din?" He had his own cabinet of supplements, more than I had. His own special food, bowls elevated on a custom stand, a heating pad for his hips. At night, Carol massaged his joints with something that smelled like eucalyptus. I joked once, "That dog's living better than I ever did." And Carol smiled faintly and said, "He deserves it. He's been through a lot." There were rules. Don't feed Buster table scraps. Don't open the front door without checking the yard. Don't leave my shoes out because he chewed leather. I adjusted. I told myself it was a small price to pay. She was offering me safety, care, and structure. I reminded myself that Margaret would have approved. "Don't be proud," she used to say. "Let people help you. That's what love is." I remembered those words every time I felt the walls of my new room closing in on me. I kept out of the way. I watched TV in my room, took short walks when Lena was there, read in the sunroom when the weather allowed. I didn't complain. I didn't want to be a burden. But the bed bothered me. Not the mattress, that was new and fine, but the bed itself. It was small, unfamiliar, cold. I missed my oak bed, the one Carol said would be too big for the room. She promised we'd put it in storage. I asked her twice where it was. She changed the subject both times. I should have known something was wrong then. But I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that my daughter, my only child, was doing all this out of love. I needed to believe it, because if I didn't, then I'd have to admit that I was no longer a father in her eyes, just a responsibility, a project, something to manage, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. It was a Tuesday morning when everything shifted, quietly, without ceremony, the kind of moment that doesn't seem remarkable at first, but reverberates for months after. I had gone out with Lena for a short walk around the block. The weather was beginning to turn toward spring, the brittle edge of winter softening slightly, puddles forming under the gutters, and the smell of thawed earth in the air. I was in a good mood, or at least something close to it. The sunlight felt good on my face, and I remember telling Lena that I might try walking a bit farther the next day, if the weather held. She smiled and said she'd bring me her mother's chicken soup to celebrate. I don't know why I remember that detail. Maybe because it was the last thing said to me before everything collapsed. When we returned to the house, I noticed the front door was propped open slightly. Unusual. Carol was strict about closing it. Heat waste, she'd say. Lena held the door for me, and we stepped inside. At first, nothing seemed out of place. The hallway was as tidy as ever. I removed my coat, reached for the hook where I usually hung it, and found it gone. The hook had been unscrewed. A minor thing, yes, but it planted a seed of disorientation in my mind. Then I turned toward the hallway leading to my room, or what used to be my room, and stopped short. The door was open, but the room was no longer mine. The bed was gone. The recliner, my suitcase, the small bookshelf with my worn collection of Civil War biographies gone. In their place was a wide, plush gray dog bed that took up nearly half the floor, flanked by a row of colorful, squeaky toys and a low shelf filled with grooming brushes, supplements, and folded blankets. In the far corner, I saw what looked like a small padded staircase for dogs to climb onto couches. The window had been covered with a blackout curtain, presumably so Buster could nap during the day without the sun bothering him. The scent of lavender air freshener was overwhelming, cloying. It struck me as a sickly sweet attempt to mask something unnatural. I stood there for a long moment, trying to understand what I was seeing. My room, the place where I read every night, where I kept Margaret's photo on the nightstand, where I prayed quietly before bed, had been converted into a dog suite. Not just a sleeping space, but a curated, designed sanctuary. It looked like something out of a pet magazine, a luxury kennel, a shrine. Lena said nothing. She stood slightly behind me, her hand hovering near my elbow in case I lost balance. I didn't. My legs were steady. My hands, however, had begun to tremble. I walked in slowly, each step feeling like I was intruding in a stranger's room. I bent down, reached for the floor where my bed used to sit, and touched the carpet. It was new. They had changed the carpet. The brown shag I used to vacuum every Friday had been replaced with a cream-colored orthopedic foam mat, likely chosen for traction. I looked around for any sign of my things. Nothing. Not a book. Not a pillow. Not the framed wedding photo that had sat on my dresser. It was as if I had never been there. "Carol must have moved your things," Lena said finally, her voice low, hesitant. I didn't answer. I turned around and walked down the hallway toward the kitchen, where I could hear Carol humming faintly over the sound of the dishwasher. When she saw me, she smiled. "You're back early," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "How was the walk?" "My room is gone," I said. She didn't flinch. "Oh, right. I meant to talk to you about that. It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal," I repeated, unsure I'd heard her correctly. "I just thought Buster needed more space. He's getting older, and it's hard for him to go up and down the stairs. That guest room was perfect for him. It gets a lot of light, it's quiet, and it's closer to the kitchen. He's been struggling with his hips lately. I spoke with Dr. Feldman about it, and he agreed it would be good for his arthritis." "And where am I supposed to sleep?" I asked. Carol didn't look up right away. She walked to the pantry, took out a box of herbal tea, and placed it on the counter. "There's a setup in the basement," she said. Michael cleared out the back corner. "We put a cot there. It's temporary, of course, just until we figure out something better. I've got a humidifier down there and the space heater. You'll be fine." "A cot?" I said. "It's actually a camping bed, a really good one. We bought it last year for Michael's brother when he stayed over, and there's a partition curtain, so you'll have privacy. We've been meaning to turn that part of the basement into a guest suite anyway. Consider yourself the pilot project." There was a pause, heavy, suffocating. "I didn't agree to this," I said. "You didn't have to," she replied, finally looking me in the eye. "It's our house, Dad. We're doing what's best for everyone." "Everyone," I repeated, meaning the dog. "Buster is part of this family," she said sharply. "He's been with us for 12 years. He's aging. He's in pain. We're doing what we can to make him comfortable. Don't make this into something it's not. You threw away my bed." "Number I donated it. There are people who need furniture." "I needed it." "You'll be fine. Stop acting like this is a punishment. You're not a prisoner." "I feel like one." Carol sighed. That long, exasperated sigh she used to give as a teenager when she was told to clean her room. "Dad, you have food, shelter, warmth. You're not paying rent. You're not contributing to the household expenses. We're taking care of everything. And all we ask is that you be flexible." I couldn't speak. My throat was too tight. She continued as if she hadn't noticed. "Besides, the basement is more private. You can have your own space. You always said you liked quiet. Well, now you'll have plenty of it. Michael even ran a cable down there for the television. You can watch your documentaries all day if you want." I turned and walked out. Slowly, dignity intact, I went downstairs. The basement smelled like dry cement and detergent. The cot was there, surrounded by plastic storage bins and boxes labeled Christmas, taxes, old cords. There was a single lamp and a thin curtain that swayed in the breeze from the vent above. My suitcase was at the foot of the cot, neatly zipped, as if I were already packed. I sat on the edge of the cot and listened. I could hear the faint thudding of Buster's paws upstairs, the jingling of his collar, the sound of Carol's voice rising in baby tones as she spoke to him. "Good boy. You like your new room, don't you?" "Yes, you do. You're such a special guy." She never spoke to me that way, not even close. That night I lay on the cot, the thin mattress bowing under my weight, my hip aching from the pressure. I stared at the exposed pipes above, the blinking red light on the water heater, and I realized something that should have been clear a long time ago. I was no longer a part of this family. I was an accommodation, a footnote, a leftover. And if I didn't do something soon, I would disappear entirely. The next morning I woke up to the sharp ache of cold settling in my bones. The space heater Carol had left downstairs had clicked off sometime during the night, and the concrete floor had leached away whatever residual warmth the cot had provided. I sat up slowly, every joint in protest, and pulled my coat over my pajamas. The light filtering through the narrow basement window was pale and gray, the kind of light that seemed less like morning and more like resignation. I listened for movement upstairs and heard only the low rumble of the dishwasher and the high-pitched chime of Buster's bark. It was the bark he used when he wanted breakfast, impatient and entitled, like the sound of a silver spoon hitting crystal. I took my time climbing the stairs. There was no rush now, no room of my own waiting for me, no morning paper folded neatly by my chair, no coffee percolating with that familiar gurgle from the machine I'd used for years. Carol had replaced it with a smart model that connected to her phone and obeyed voice commands. I didn't bother learning how to use it. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water and waited by the kitchen window, watching the wind move through the bare trees in the backyard. Carol came in a few minutes later, dressed in her gym clothes, earbuds already in. She looked surprised to see me. "Did you sleep all right?" she asked, tying her ponytail. "No," I said, and left it at that. She made a noise, something between a sigh and a chuckle, and opened the fridge. "You've always had trouble sleeping in new places. It's normal. You'll adjust." "I'm not a guest in a hotel, Carol," I said. "This is supposed to be my home now." She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out a container of protein smoothie, gave it a shake, and drank it as if I hadn't spoken. Then, almost as an afterthought, she said, "I'll be back by noon. Lena should be here in an hour. Let her know if you need anything." I wanted to say I needed a room, my bed, my dignity, but I said nothing. I was tired of repeating myself. She left in a whirl of perfume and headphones, Buster trotting behind her like an obedient disciple. That was the beginning of the new routine. Breakfast in silence. A quick appearance by Carol if she was working from home. The occasional comment about how Dad's being moody, or maybe we should look into adult daycare, something social. Michael never addressed me directly anymore. He communicated through Carol or short, clipped phrases when I passed him in the hallway. "Hey," he'd mutter without stopping. The kind of greeting you give to someone on the bus, not to the man funding your mortgage. A few days after the move to the basement, Lena came down with a folded piece of paper and an apologetic look. "Your daughter asked me to give you this," she said, placing it on the folding table beside my cot. I unfolded it. It was a printed, updated household guidelines written in Carol's clipped, professional tone. "Please be mindful of the following. 1. Buster is on a special diet. Do not feed him human food under any circumstances. Dusra. The upstairs thermostat is set for Buster's comfort. Please avoid adjusting it. 3. Quiet hours begin at 9 p.m. Please use headphones if watching TV after this time. 4. All personal laundry should be placed in the basket by Wednesday morning. 5. Medication should be taken as scheduled. Lena will monitor compliance. 6. Please refrain from unnecessary clutter. The basement is a shared storage area. The list went on for a full page. I reread it twice, not because I didn't understand it, but because I couldn't believe it existed. My daughter, the little girl who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms, who cried when I missed her school play in 3rd grade because I had the flu, that same child was now issuing bureaucratic mandates to govern my daily behavior like I was a tenant in a halfway house. That evening, I found my books, the ones from my old room, stacked in a cardboard box labeled Dad Stuff. Most were damaged, the corners bent, a few with pages crumpled. My framed photo of Margaret had a crack across the glass, and one of her earrings had fallen out from the frame, now lost. I stood there, staring at the pile, and felt something inside me twist. Not rage, something deeper, older, grief maybe, or the slow realization that my life had been reduced to a box in someone else's basement. I didn't confront Carol that night. Instead, I wrote a list of my own. Not for her, for me. A quiet act of resistance. I wrote down everything I had contributed since moving in, the proceeds from the sale of my house, which I'd transferred to a joint account Carol managed, the furniture that had been donated or lost, the bed that had been given away without my consent. I added up the total in rough estimates, nearly $270,000 worth of assets, not counting the monthly pension payments that also now flowed through the joint account. I kept that list in my wallet. A week later, I overheard a conversation that changed everything. I was coming up the stairs quietly, hoping to sneak a glass of juice without disturbing Buster, who had taken to growling whenever I entered the kitchen. Carol and Michael were in the dining room, unaware of my presence. Their voices were hushed, but not enough. I talked to the financial planner, Carol said. He said if we move the funds to the trust now, we'll avoid estate tax down the line. But we need Dad to sign off. Michael replied, we should wait. He's still too alert. He's suspicious lately, keeps asking about his bed, the account. He's writing things down. Maybe we should start talking to the doctor, Carol said. Get something on file. Memory issues, early stage dementia. He's 81. It won't be hard. I stood still, barely breathing. Michael's voice lowered. If we're going to do it, we need to make it clean. No surprises. One bad day, and he could lock us out of the account. He won't, Carol said. He trusts me. He always has. Michael snorted. You'd be surprised how fast trust evaporates when people realize they've been screwed. At that point, Buster barked from the living room, and the conversation ended. I backed down the stairs before they could see me. My heart was pounding. Not from fear, but from clarity. For the first time, everything made sense. The basement, the bed, the condescension, the lists, the careful separation of space and autonomy. It wasn't about comfort. It was about control. I was being managed, observed, and slowly maneuvered out of my own life. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the cot with a legal pad, writing everything I remembered from that conversation. I began researching trusts, power of attorney laws, financial guardianship procedures. I took notes on the medications I was prescribed, on every conversation I had with Lena or Carol, on every discrepancy between what they said and what they did. I hid the notebook inside an old hardcover copy of A People's History of the United States, a book I knew no one in the house would ever touch. And then, as the clock passed 3 a.m., I made a decision. I would not confront Carol. I would not argue with Michael. I would not ask about my bed again. Instead, I would find a way to take back what remained of my life, quietly, methodically, with the same patience I once used to prepare lesson plans to teach generations of students about the consequences of arrogance and betrayal. They had underestimated me. That was their first mistake. Their second was assuming that a man sleeping in a basement was too broken to fight back. A few days later, when Lena arrived for her usual afternoon visit, I asked her if she could help me go to the public library. I told her I was feeling a little stir-crazy in the house, that I wanted to be among books again, that the basement air was starting to feel heavy. She looked hesitant, said she'd need to ask Carol, but I assured her it was just for a short visit and that I'd be back before dinner time. I don't know if she asked or simply decided it wasn't worth the trouble, but she eventually agreed. I put on my old coat, the one Margaret patched up years ago, and we walked slowly to her car, careful not to attract attention. Carol was at work. Michael, presumably upstairs in his cave of screens and muted contempt. Buster watched us leave from the window, his face pressed against the glass like a sentry. The library was quiet and smelled like forgotten paper, the scent of knowledge left to settle. I found a corner near the large print section and asked Lena if she could give me an hour or two alone. She agreed and went off to browse. I sat down at a public computer terminal, typed slowly, methodically. I looked up legal aid clinics, elder law attorneys, and financial abuse resources. I printed out names and numbers, stuffed them into my jacket pocket like contraband. I felt nervous, like a schoolboy hiding test answers, but also strangely alive, like blood was moving again through parts of me that had long been cold. I also looked up medical power of attorney and how to revoke one. I hadn't signed anything like that, at least I didn't think I had, but I wanted to be sure. I learned about revocation forms, notarization, the importance of mental competency. And suddenly, that word, competency, took on an enormous, looming weight. That's what Carol was targeting. That's what she and Michael were slowly laying the groundwork for. A subtle campaign of helplessness. Move the bed, remove financial access, isolate, document small forgettings, exaggerate them, plant seeds. All they needed was a doctor willing to nod politely and sign a form, and then everything would belong to them. The money, the choices, my name. That night, I lay on the cot with the legal pad on my chest, staring at the ceiling, not writing. I felt something new, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Rage. Not the sharp, fast kind. Not the kind that flares and fades. No, this was slower, colder. The kind that sits in the lungs and makes you breathe differently. I thought about Margaret. I imagined what she would say if she saw where I was now, exiled to the basement while our grandson-sized dog snored contentedly in my former room. I imagined her horror, her sorrow, and then I imagined something else. A memory surfaced, sharp and sudden. Margaret in the hospital bed, only weeks before the end, taking my hand and whispering, "Promise me you won't let Carol control you. Not just for money, for dignity, for who you are." At the time, I dismissed it. I thought it was the morphine, the fear of dying making her paranoid. Carol had always been headstrong, yes, but loving. I was sure of it. But now, in the dark of that cement box, I understood. Margaret had seen something in our daughter long before I had the courage to face it. She had seen that Carol didn't want a father. She wanted an asset. The next morning, I made a phone call. Not from my cell phone. Carol monitored the usage. I used the library's landline. I called one of the elder law attorneys I'd found online. His name was Harris Wexler. Mid-60s, gruff voice, no-nonsense tone. I told him I wasn't sure if I needed legal help, but I thought maybe my daughter was planning to declare me incompetent to gain control of my finances. He didn't react with surprise. Instead, he asked calmly, "Do you have independent income?" "Yes." "Do you have access to your accounts?" "No." "Do you have a place to live outside your daughter's house?" "No." "Then you do need help." We set a time to meet the following Tuesday. Lena agreed to take me again. I didn't tell her why. I just said it was for a medical appointment. She nodded without question. Maybe she knew more than she let on. On the morning of the meeting, I wore my best shirt, the one I'd buried Margaret in. The sleeves were too loose now, but it still smelled faintly of cedar from the chest, where I kept it. Harris's office was modest. Dusty law books, a half-dead plant in the corner, and a secretary who called him Mr. W. He greeted me with a firm handshake and no smile. I liked that. I told him everything. The move, the basement, the missing bed, the overheard conversation, the money. He didn't interrupt, just took notes in an old-fashioned yellow pad, occasionally underlining something with firm strokes. When I finished, he said, "We can start by revoking any financial authority they might have. Do you recall signing anything?" But I gave Carol access to the joint account." "That's not the same as power of attorney," he said. "We'll get clarity on that. Second, we'll document your mental competency. I have a geriatric specialist who will evaluate you. Third, we'll look into recovering control of your finances, but that may take some time. Banks are nervous about elder abuse accusations, but the paper trail will help." "And the house?" I asked. He raised an eyebrow. "Your house?" I gave her the proceeds. She said she'd manage it. "Was that in writing?" "No." He smiled grimly. "That helps us." I left his office with a folder of documents, a list of tasks, and something I hadn't had in months, a direction. When I got home, I didn't go straight to the basement. Instead, I walked into the living room. Carol was there, brushing Buster's coat with a Furminator brush like she was polishing silver. She looked up, startled. "Where have you been?" she asked, out. With Lena? No. Doing what? Taking care of something. She narrowed her eyes, then softened her voice. Dad, you can't just disappear like that. If you're feeling confused. I'm not confused, she hesitated. We're just trying to help you. I know what you're trying to do, she blinked. Excuse me? I said I know. She stood up slowly. Is this about the room again? Because if you're going to hold that over us, it's not about the room, then what is it? It's about Margaret. She froze. She warned me before she died. She told me not to let you do this. She saw it before I did, and I didn't listen. Carol opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I walked past her, down to the basement, and for the first time since arriving, I didn't feel like I was descending into exile. I was walking toward something, toward resolution. I was no longer a passive observer in my own life. The game had changed, and I intended to win. The appointment with Dr. Isabel Krell, the geriatric neuropsychologist Harris recommended, was set for the following Thursday. She worked out of a clinic 2 towns over, in a modest building surrounded by birch trees and neatly trimmed hedges. Harris had warned me that the evaluation would be extensive. Cognitive tests, memory exercises, motor coordination assessments, psychological interviews. I wasn't nervous. If anything, I welcomed the scrutiny. I wanted documentation. I wanted an official record that would confirm what I already knew. My mind was intact, my faculties were functioning, and I was no one's puppet. Lena drove me without asking questions. She seemed quieter that day, maybe sensing the weight of what this outing meant. I told her only that it was a checkup. She nodded, kept her eyes on the road. Doctor. Krell was younger than I expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and a calm voice. She greeted me warmly, led me to her office, and explained everything in a no-nonsense tone I respected immediately. The tests were long and tedious, drawing shapes, recalling sequences, answering questions about time, place, presidents. I aced most of them, fumbled only once when she asked me to recall a series of 5 unrelated words after 15 minutes of distraction. I remembered 4. When she looked up from her notes and smiled slightly, I felt an odd sense of victory, like passing an exam I hadn't studied for, but had lived every day instead. At the end of the session, she looked at me across her desk and said, Mr. Emmett, you're sharper than half the 50-year-olds I see. Whoever's telling you otherwise is either misinformed or has an agenda. I didn't respond. I simply nodded, took the report she printed for me, and tucked it into my folder like a weapon. Back home, the house was empty. Carol had left a note on the fridge. Dinner in the oven. Quinoa casserole. Michael working late. Don't forget your pills. I stood there for a long time, staring at her handwriting. There was something chilling about the tone. Efficient, managerial, impersonal, as if I were a patient in a facility she oversaw, not the man who once held her hand during thunderstorms or carried her on his shoulders through the state fair when her legs got tired. I didn't touch the casserole. I made myself a sandwich instead, took my plate down to the basement, and stared at the cracked wall for a long time before opening the manila envelope from Dr. Krell again. I read every word of that report, underlining key phrases. No evidence of cognitive impairment. Excellent executive function. Appropriate affect. Independent living capacity retained. I highlighted them, circled them, marked them in red pen. The next day, Harris called. He had already received his copy of the report and sounded pleased. "This is solid," he said. "It makes any future attempts at guardianship practically impossible without fraudulent documents or fabricated incidents. We're going to move fast. I'm drafting revocation paperwork for any implied power of attorney. We'll serve it formally through certified mail. I've also submitted a request to the bank for a freeze on the joint account, pending investigation." I thanked him and hung up. It was the first time in months that I felt the scaffolding of my dignity begin to rebuild, brick by careful brick. What I hadn't expected was Carol's counterattack. It came in the form of a scheduled family meeting 2 days later. She called me upstairs at 4 p.m., an unusual hour, too early for dinner, too late for coffee. I walked up slowly. Michael was already seated at the kitchen table, laptop open, spreadsheets visible. Buster lay sprawled on the couch, unconcerned. Carol stood by the counter, arms crossed, face composed in that studied expression of professional concern I'd seen her use on insurance reps and dental patients alike. "We've been talking," she began, "and we're concerned. You've been secretive lately, leaving the house without notice, making strange phone calls, acting paranoid." Michael nodded, eyes still on his screen. "We think it's time to consider next steps, Dad. Something more structured." I said nothing. I knew what this was. Carol pulled out a folder, thinner than mine, but still official-looking, and opened it on the table. "This is an initial assessment from Dr. Loring, a geriatrician I've worked with. I told him about your behavior. He agrees that you may be in the early stages of cognitive decline. You spoke to a doctor about me without my consent? I'm your daughter," she said sharply, "and you live in my home. I'm obligated to act in your best interest." "You're not a doctor." "And you're not stable," she said. Michael cut in. "This doesn't have to be adversarial. We can explore assisted living options together. Nice places, comfortable. You'd have your own space, people your age, activities, meals, and we'd be free to live our lives without constant worry." I looked at both of them, then slowly reached into the folder I'd brought up with me and placed Dr. Krell's report on the table. I watched as Carol's face drained of color. "What is this?" she asked. "My cognitive evaluation," I said, "from a licensed neuropsychologist, conducted 4 days ago." She picked it up, scanned the first page, then flipped quickly through the rest. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. "I don't believe this," she muttered. "You don't have to, but the courts will." Michael stood, finally looking nervous. "You went to a lawyer?" "Yes." "And a doctor?" "Yes." "You've been planning this?" "No," I said. "I've been surviving." "There's a difference." Carol dropped the report back on the table and backed away like it had burned her fingers. "You think you're clever, don't you?" "No," I said, "just awake." They both stood there, caught between fury and calculation, trying to recalibrate. I could see the numbers spinning behind Michael's eyes, the panic tightening Carol's jaw. The room was silent, except for the sound of Buster scratching behind his ear. I walked to the counter, poured myself a glass of water, and took a slow sip. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "You're going to return full control of my finances. You're going to transfer the remaining balance in the joint account to an account in my name. You're going to provide me with a copy of every document you've signed on my behalf in the past 12 months. And you're going to do it without delay, obstruction, or further lies." Michael laughed bitterly. "And if we don't, then I file for financial exploitation of an elder adult under state law," I said, "which, if you haven't looked it up yet, carries both civil and criminal penalties. I have counsel, I have medical documentation, I have motive and paper trail, and I have time." Carol's voice cracked slightly when she spoke. "You'd take us to court? Your own daughter?" "I don't have a daughter," I said quietly. "Not anymore." She recoiled as if I'd slapped her. I walked back to the basement, heart racing, fingers shaking slightly, but not from fear. It was adrenaline, righteousness, the slow reclamation of something essential. That night, Carol knocked on the basement door, but didn't enter. She stood on the threshold, silhouetted by the hallway light. "You're making a mistake," she said. "So did you," I replied. She left without another word. The next morning, the balance of the joint account appeared in my new personal account. My name was removed from any automatic withdrawals. Lena confirmed that Carol had called to cancel her services. No more check-ins, no more medication monitoring, no more rides. I was cut loose, but I didn't feel abandoned. I felt free. The next step was mine, and I was ready to take it. The week that followed was strangely quiet. Carol avoided me almost entirely, choosing to communicate only by text message or passive-aggressive notes left on the kitchen counter. Michael stayed locked in his upstairs office, only appearing briefly to take Buster for a walk or retrieve another energy drink from the fridge. Neither of them mentioned the incident with the doctor's report. There were no more threats, no more veiled suggestions about my well-being or next steps. But the air in the house had shifted. Something had broken between us, something unspoken and final. And now all that remained was the formal unspooling of whatever strings still bound us together. I knew I couldn't stay there much longer. Even with the legal groundwork in place and the account transferred, the dynamic in the house had become untenable. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was tactical, suspended, like the breath before a final blow. I began packing in secret, slowly, carefully. I folded my few remaining clothes, wrapped Margaret's photograph in 2 sweaters, and slid my notebooks and documents into an old briefcase I hadn't used since retirement. Each night, after the lights upstairs had gone out, I reviewed listings in the area: apartments, senior rentals, short-term sublets. I wasn't looking for luxury. I was looking for autonomy, for distance, for walls I could lean on without fear they'd be listening. 3 days before I planned to leave, Carol cornered me in the laundry room. She was holding a glass of wine, her second or third, by the way her mouth moved. She didn't say hello. "So this is it," she asked. You're just going to disappear after everything we've done for you? I didn't respond immediately. I loaded the last of my socks into a duffel bag and zipped it slowly, methodically, as if packing itself were an answer. You think I'm some kind of villain, she continued, her voice tight. You think I don't care. But you're wrong. You've always been so dramatic, always painting everything in black and white. I finally looked at her. It's not drama when it's truth, she laughed bitterly. Truth? You want to talk about truth? Fine. Here's the truth. You've never been easy to live with. Not for Mom. Not for me. You were cold. You never asked about my life. You were always correcting people, always lecturing. You don't know how exhausting it is to try to please someone who's never satisfied. The words hit harder than I expected. Maybe because some of them were true. Or maybe because they were close enough to true to cut through defenses I'd spent decades building. But even so, I didn't flinch. I stood up, slung the duffel bag over my shoulder, and met her gaze without blinking. Maybe I wasn't easy, I said, but I never once treated you like property. I never tried to control your life. I gave you everything I had, every dollar, every hour of worry, every compromise, and you turned it into leverage. Her expression faltered for a second. A flicker of something, doubt maybe, or recognition, passed across her face, but it vanished quickly, replaced by the mask she always wore when she felt cornered. You're going to regret this, she said. I already do. I left that night, quietly, with no goodbye. I called a cab from a burner phone I'd bought with cash, and had it take me to a short-term rental on the other side of town, a small one-bedroom above a bakery, with creaky floors and sunlight that streamed through the windows in the morning like forgiveness. The landlord, a woman in her 70s named Elsie, didn't ask questions. She took my check, gave me the keys, and told me the mailbox stuck sometimes. I thanked her. The place smelled like yeast and dust and freedom. The first thing I did after settling in was go to the bank and close the joint account permanently. I opened a new one, put my name on it alone, and gave no forwarding address. Then I went to Harris's office, handed him a typed list of everything Carol had controlled, signed over, or claimed in the past year. He nodded, skimmed the contents, and said, "Good. This gives us leverage. She'll either cooperate or we'll force her hand." The next step was the house. Not the one I used to own, but the one they lived in. It had been bought with the down payment I gave them after Margaret died. Carol had promised then that my name would be on the deed as a co-owner. I hadn't questioned her. I'd trusted her signature more than I trusted fine print. But now I wanted proof. Harris obtained the title documents and confirmed it. My name was there, in black ink, as 1/3 owner. Not just on paper, but legally binding. If they wanted to sell the house, they needed my consent. If I wanted to sell my share, I could initiate the process with or without theirs. I took a deep breath and told Harris, "Start the process." He didn't blink. "This will get ugly. I'm already living with the bruise." The next week was a blur of signatures, certified letters, and appraisals. I contacted a realtor, scheduled an evaluation, and had the property listed formally. I knew they wouldn't go quietly. I expected threats, pleas, manipulation. But what I got instead was silence, and that silence was louder than any protest could have been, until the morning Carol showed up at the rental. I was having coffee in the kitchen when the knock came. I opened the door, and there she stood, hair unwashed, eyes bloodshot, clutching a manila envelope like a weapon. "Don't do this," she said. "Please, just don't." I didn't invite her in. "This house," she said, voice cracking, "it's our stability. It's where Michael works, where Buster's comfortable. We can't move. It's not fair." "Fair," I repeated. "You put me in a basement." She winced, just slightly. "I didn't know it would hurt you so much," she said. "Yes, you did," I said. "You just didn't care." She held out the envelope. Inside were photos, old ones, of me holding her as a baby, of the three of us at the Grand Canyon, of Margaret smiling at the kitchen table. I didn't touch them. "This is all I have," she whispered. "This is my family." "No," I said. "This is your evidence, and it's too late." She looked at me then, really looked, as if trying to find something she recognized in my face, and failing. "I hate you," she said. "No," I replied. "You hate that I stopped being useful?" She didn't deny it. She turned and walked away, envelope still clutched in her arms like a child holding broken toys. I closed the door and locked it and exhaled. For the first time in years, I wasn't under anyone's roof but my own, and soon I'd no longer be under their thumb. The paperwork was in motion, and I was ready to finish what they started. The sale of the house went through 6 weeks later. There was no fight, no court battle, no appeal, just a quiet, sterile process of signatures and disbursements. Carol and Michael moved out before the closing date. I never asked where they went. They didn't tell me. The realtor handled the coordination. Harris sent me the final breakdown of proceeds, and I saw the numbers in black and white, enough to live comfortably for the rest of my days. I transferred the funds into a trust under my name only. I gave Harris power to act on my behalf. Should anything happen, it was done. Clean, permanent. I stayed in the apartment above the bakery for another month. The smell of fresh bread each morning reminded me of a world that still had small comforts in it. Elsie brought me scones on Sundays and told me about her granddaughter in Ohio. I listened. I smiled. I asked questions. It felt good to be spoken to as a person again, not a liability. I stopped looking over my shoulder. I stopped sleeping with my shoes next to the bed, ready for escape. I started reading again. I reread The Old Man and the Sea, Stoner, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. I saw myself in all of them. Lena called once. She had heard from someone, maybe Carol, maybe someone else, that I was gone. She didn't ask for details. She just said she hoped I was okay, and that she'd saved one of Margaret's scarves by accident when helping Carol clean out the basement. She offered to return it. I told her to keep it. "It might bring you better luck than it brought me," I said. She laughed softly. I hung up before the silence got heavy. There was no dramatic ending, no arrest, no confession, no last-minute apology, just absence, like a radio being turned down slowly until you forget what station you were even listening to. I never heard from Carol again. Not a birthday card, not a call, nothing. Sometimes I wondered if she would appear again someday. Maybe older, maybe broken, maybe softened by years and distance. But then I would remember how easily she had erased me from her life while still using my name, my money, my memory. That kind of erasure is a skill, and people who learn to do it rarely forget how. I don't think I hate her. That would require too much feeling. What I feel now is a kind of distant mourning, as if she died, as if the version of her I once believed in was buried beneath the weight of ambition and entitlement. I don't visit that grave often, but I know it's there. In spring, I moved to a small cottage in a retirement community on the edge of town. It's quiet, surrounded by trees, with a porch, where I sit most mornings with coffee and a book. The neighbors are kind but not intrusive. I keep to myself. I take long walks. I've learned to cook again, poorly, but with effort. Some evenings I write. Not letters, there's no one left to send them to, but reflections, pieces of memory. I write about Margaret. About the sound of her voice when she laughed at something only I found funny. About the way her hands looked when she pulled weeds from the garden, dirt under her nails, sun on her cheeks. I write about my students, the ones who stayed after class to ask about the world. I write about silence and how it can become a language when all others fail. Sometimes I write about the bed, not because I miss it, though I do, but because it became a symbol of how a man's place in his own family can be dismantled piece by piece until he wakes up on a cot next to plastic boxes and realizes he's been evicted from his own legacy. That bed was the last thing Margaret and I built together, and Carol gave it to a dog. There is no poetry in that, only a kind of finality. But I'm not bitter. Bitterness is a weight. I've put it down. What I carry now is lighter, a kind of clarity, a knowledge of what was lost and what was reclaimed. I lost my family, but I reclaimed my name, my choices, myself. And in this season of my life, this quiet epilogue, that is enough.